Well, hello everybody, and welcome back. We've said this before, and we're gonna say it again. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you're excited to learn something new about V-Ray for Cinema 4D. In this tutorial, we're going to be focusing our attention on finalizing the lighting in our little scene here. Okay, so the lighting, while it's looking pretty cool already, could be finalized. It could be sort of tuned a little bit more so that we get it from looking cool to making it look really cool. Now, as we do that, we're also going to explore the light mix functionality. And the light mix functionality is basically like magic. Because with light mix, what you can do is you can basically fine-tune the intensity and the color of your lights in real time without having to even restart the interactive renderer. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing here. So let's go at it. Now, let's take a look at our scene here. Let's just talk about the overall lighting for a second so that we know why we're going to be making the changes that we will be making. So at the moment, the lighting is looking interesting. I think we'll want to retain this sort of a triangle-ish shape that's happening here with the direct sunlight. But since the sofa is supposed to be the star of the show, I think we could get rid of this highlight on the front wall here. I think it's just drawing too much attention to itself. So that's what we're going to want to tweak here first. Okay. So to do that, well, we're just going to have to play with the sun's position. And this is totally a creative process. You just want to move the sun around until you get to a result that you like the most. Okay, so I'm just going to move it around here a little bit. I'm going to see how things are looking. And the interactive renderer is obviously of great help here because it basically updates almost in real time. So you can almost immediately see the changes that you're making. And so I think a position, if we position the sun like it is positioned now, I think this is looking pretty interesting. So we got rid of that highlight on the front wall there, and we are still retaining that triangle-ish shape there. Now on the front wall here, that direct sunbeam, okay, is going off screen here. So I think we could fine-tune that a little bit. And how we're gonna do that is we're actually gonna have to select the architecture mesh here. We're gonna go into the polygon mode, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna tighten up this window opening here a little bit. So we're just gonna make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so like this. Well, let's see how that looks like. And as you can see, now we're sort of tightening up that hole, and that kind of affects how the sun is coming into our room here. I think we could tighten it up just a little bit more. Okay, nothing too drastic, just a little bit more. Let's see how that looks like. Well, we could move it just a little bit more still. Okay. Okay, just a little bit more. There we go. I think that'll do. Yeah, okay, so this is looking pretty good. We're still retaining that triangle-ish shape, and we're getting rid of that highlight. So job well done there. Obviously, it's all about experimenting, and we've experimented here, and I kind of like the result. So we're going to go with this setup here. Now, the sunlight, the way that it's coming into the rooms, both of these rooms, is looking cool to me. But the rooms are kind of comparatively dark. So the sunlight is super strong, the direct sunlight that is. But the rest of the rooms could use some sort of a fill light illuminating them just a little bit more. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to go under the V-Ray menu here, and we're going to bring in a new rectangle light. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move this rectangle light right in front of this window opening here in our first room. Okay, so kind of like that. We can push it a little bit higher here. Okay, and then we obviously want to make it a little bit wider. Okay, and I think if it encompasses the entire length of the wall here, I think that's gonna be just fine. So kind of like that. Okay, let's just make it a little bit, well, taller by adjusting its height parameter. So maybe sort of kind of like this. All right, maybe we can position it just a little bit higher up. And there we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now, the interactive rendering here looks pretty bad. This lighting is incredibly dull. Okay, but let's talk about what's happening here before we actually go and we tweak it. So if we move our camera around here and we focus our attention on the rectangle light that we just created, you're going to notice that this rectangle light here is a realistic light. It's basically, we basically place this giant softbox right in front of the window. We can visually see it as a softbox in our interactive renderer, right? It's this big plane here, right? That's emitting light. And because this rectangle light is a realistic light, it's actually blocking all of the lights behind it. Okay, so we're not getting that nice sunbeam entering the room here. Okay, now what we're gonna do next here is something that that photographers in the real world, in real life, really want to do with their lights, but they just can't. But we, working in computer graphics, we can. So we're going to go under the options menu here and we're going to tick invisible, the invisible parameter to on here. Now what that's going to do is it's going to make this rectangle light invisible. So it's, as you can see, we can't see it anymore, but if we turn it off, you're going to see that it's definitely still emitting light. We just can't visually see it. And what's also happening is that now that we made it invisible, this rectangle light is not occluding the lights behind it anymore. Okay, as you can clearly see, we get that sunbeam entering the room again. So that's exactly what we want. Now, if you just wanted to make this rectangle light be invisible, but you still wanted it to occlude all the lights behind it, you can do that. In that case, just make sure that the invisible parameter is checked on, and also make sure that the occlude other lights is checked on. Now this way, the light is going to be invisible, but it's still going to occlude all the lights that are behind it. All right. We obviously don't want that. So let's untick that checkbox, the occlude other lights checkbox. What we do want to untick here as well is the affect specular and affect reflections checkboxes. Now, why are we doing this? Well, if we just disable the invisible checkbox here for a second, this is a giant softbox. Okay. And this softbox, by default, is going to be visible in your speculars and in your reflections. And that's kind of going to look dull because it's a really big light source. So to work around that, you can just simply disable it from affecting your speculars and your reflections, which is exactly what we did here by unticking these checkboxes. Okay? Now, do note, we aren't creating light portals here. Those are old school techniques and are not needed at all in V-Ray 5 and newer versions. Because now in these newer versions, the adaptive dome light will essentially take care of all that portal magic on its own. So this giant light we created here just adds another light source to our scene. And that's a completely creative decision. Okay, cool. So I think that light's pretty much set up here. Maybe we could lower its intensity down to maybe 10. Or so, and then let's also give it a proper name. So let's call it entrance room light. All right. Okay, cool. Now, will we tweak do we want to still tweak the intensity of this light? Definitely, but we're not gonna fine tune it just yet. We're gonna do that with the help of light mix. It's gonna make our lives a lot easier because, you know, light mix works basically in real time. So let's just leave the intensity at 10. Let's leave the color at its default. And let's move on to the second room here, okay, to the sofa room, because I think we could also place another similar light in that room as well, because it's looking a little bit dim right now. So let's just copy this entrance room light, just drag it over in front of the other window opening. Let's call this light a sofa room light, okay, and then let's just make it smaller. All right. Let's make it way smaller. We still want it to be bigger than the window hole opening here. Okay. So maybe a value of 360 centimeters or so is about correct. Okay. So let's just position it sort of right in front of the window, hole opening there. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. So with these two lights now in our scene, we're gonna fine tune them. And we're gonna do that with the help of the magical light mix functionality. So if you don't know what Lightmix is basically this awesome functionality that lets you split each and every one of your lighting contributions into their own layer. And then Lightmix does its magic and combines all those layers back into this final, physically accurate, physically realistic image. Again, it's not cheating. Using Lightmix is a perfectly physically realistic way of going about things, okay? Of going about lighting your scene, okay? So to set up Lightmix, all you need to do is you need to go under the V-Ray menu up here under Render Elements, and you're going to want to search for the Lightmix render element. And then when you find it, just drag it into the active render element list here. And effectively, just by doing that, you've enabled Lightmix. Now, the way that Lightmix groups your lights can be controlled through this group by parameter. So right now, it's grouping all of the instance lights together into their own layers. You could use individual lights. That means every light in your scene is going to be in its own individual Lightmix layer that you're going to be able to control. You can do group lights, you can do layers, or you could do manual light selects. If you do manual light selects, well then in that case, you're going to want to bring in a light select render element as well. You're probably going to want to have a couple of these, depending on how many lights you're going to want to split into their own layers. So, for example, you could call this light select layer here sofa room light, okay? And in the light list here, you would plug in the sofa room light. And that way you can set up your layers, not automatically, but manually. Now, we're not going to do that just because the automatic way of letting Lightmix do that is going to work fine for us here. We're just going to go with the individual light grouping here. So each light in our scene is going to be on its own layer. That's going to work perfectly fine for us here. Now that we set all this up, what we're going to do is we're going to stop the interactive renderer and we are going to restart it. Now, as soon as we do that, you're going to notice that our base layer here in the VFB, okay, got switched to using a Lightmix. Previously, it was using this RGB option here. Okay, but now that we've enabled Lightmix, we are greeted by the Lightmix menu, if you will, by the Lightmix UI. And down here, you're going to see all of the Lightmix layers, and each layer contains the respective lights. So we got, for example, the entrance room light layer here. If we disable it by toggling this checkbox here, look at that. Instantly, in real time, you're disabling the entrance room light. Okay, you want to tweak its intensity, play with the multiplier value. So you want to make it a lot stronger. Just up this value to, say, for example, 3. And look at that. It's going to be a lot more intense. Want to make it, less intense? Just drop the multiplier here. And as you can see, this works in real time. And it's physically accurate, physically realistic way of going about lighting your scenes. So don't worry about this being some sort of a cheat or something. All right. All right, cool. Now, if we take a closer look at all of these layers here, you're going to see that naming your lights kind of becomes important at this stage. So we got this dome light .1 here. And if we disable it, we can kind of get a sense that this is probably the sky in our scene, the V-Ray sky, right? But the name doesn't really imply that. And that's because, when we brought in our V-Ray sky, we just let it have this default name of dome light .1. So if we rename this light here to V-Ray sky, and if we then restart the interactive renderer, you're going to see that, well, now things become just a lot easier to understand. So we have this V-Ray sky light in here, or a Lightmix layer, if you will, and now we can play around with it and fine tune it. And now we know exactly what it does, right? Right, now you have some additional layers here as well, such as the rest layer. This is typically the layer where all of the lights that you have not selected fall into. You got the self-illumination layer and the environment layers. We're not using any of the lights for these, but if you had an environment light or lights with self-illumination enabled, well then they would automatically fall into these categories if they weren't split into their own layer. Okay, so those are kind of the basics of light mix essentially. So let's see it in action. So let's start tweaking things. So our entrance room light here, we could tweak it. So let's see what we can do here. Right now, entrance room light is working at its default intensity, but I think what we should do here is we should lower its intensity. Now 0 is too dark, as you can see, but if you go and give it just a little bit of that intensity, okay, so maybe something like this, I think could work really well. Okay, let's see what we can do for that other room. Okay, for that sofa room light. So right now it's set to 1. I think we could make it a little bit stronger. Let's just first see how it looks like if it's dimmer. That's definitely too dim. But if we make it super strong, that's a little bit too much. So maybe we can go with a value of 1.5. And I think this might work well here. Now, the V-Ray sky might also be a little too intense. So let's see how we can fine tune this one as well. So maybe if we just drop it down to a value of, yeah, a value of 0.8, I kind of like how that's looking. Now for the V-Ray sun, I also think it's just a little too intense. So let's drop its intensity down to, well, this looks a little too dim. Maybe a value of 0.5 here is going to work great. I kind of like how the lighting is a lot more balanced now. It's not too intense, but it's also not too dim. So I kind of like how things are looking as is. All right. All right. Now, there's one important feature for when it comes to light mix here that we still haven't talked about, and that is the ability to set the color for your lights using light mix. So all of these lights, if you'll remember, okay, they've got this default color to them. And that's fine and dandy. You can always go in here and change the color to whatever else, but it's going to trigger an interactive rendering restart, and the image is going to have to, you know, be re-rendered essentially. But with light mix, what you can do is, if for example you wanted to make the V-Ray sun light be, well, of a different color, you can just click on the color box here. It's going to bring up the color chooser, and then in here you can make your light be, well, purple if you so want to. Okay, and again, it all happens in real time, and it's all basically just like magic. And again, we really want to stress this. This is a physically accurate, physically realistic way to go about lighting your scene. So don't be worried about this being some sort of a cheat. This is going to be the exact same result as if you were to set this kind of a color inside your lights. Okay. Okay, so with that done, let's try and focus our attention on the sofa lighting here a little bit, okay? So right now the sofa is looking kind of okay, but I think we could spice it up just a little bit. So what we're gonna do here is we are gonna bring in an additional light, okay? And that light is gonna be another V-Ray rectangle light. So we're just going to move it right above the sofa. Let's go into our top view here. So let's just move it right above the sofa. Let's rotate it so that it's pointing at the sofa, not at the wall. And then let's just move it up on the y-axis. Okay, so I don't know, maybe 270 centimeters or so. Yeah, I think that's a good position for it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to resize it. Okay, so let's make the width, or maybe let's go into our top view here. Let's make the width be, well, let's just make the light a little bit wider. Okay, so something like that. As for the height, maybe we could just make it just a little bit taller, if you will. And now the lighting's not looking, it's not looking interesting any more than it did before. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to play with the directionality setting of our rectangle light here. So let's just up it to say 0.9. And you can see this rectangle light here is now going to be a lot more directional. All of the rays are going to be just coming straight down from the light. So kind of like a flashlight, okay? And as you can see, that creates a pretty cool looking highlight on our sofa here. But this is maybe just a little too directional for my taste. So let's lower the directionality value maybe just see how this is looking. And I'm paying attention to the shadows beneath it, and I think a value of 0.78, I think that will look pretty good. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to rename our rectangle light here, and we're going to call it overhead sofa light. And then we're going to stop the interactive render, and we're going to restart it. We're going to do that because by restarting it, it's going to automatically pop up in our light mix UI, if you will. Okay, so here it is, overhead sofa light. And so now what we can do is we can fine tune it, right? We can make it less strong, we could make it super strong. Well, that's intense. But I'm noticing one thing here still. If we up the overhead sofa's light intensity, you're going to see that the curtains get affected as well. So does the back wall and pretty much everything else in the scene. And I don't like that. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to set our overhead sofa light to be only affecting the sofa. And we can do that by selecting the overhead sofa light, going under the project menu here, and in here we're going to add the sofa object. All right, so let's find the sofa null here. Okay, sofa 002, let's plug it in here. But now, as you can see, the sofa is not getting affected at all, but everything else still is. So that's because currently we have our mode here set to exclude. So we're excluding the sofa from being affected by the overhead sofa light. We don't want that. We want the reverse of that, if you will. We want the inverted behavior. So to do that, we just want to set the mode here. We want to set it to be not exclude, but we want it to be include. Okay. As soon as we do that, look at that. Look at that nice magic that's happening now. So this overhead sofa light is now only affecting the sofa, which is exactly what we wanted, because we really like the highlighted effect, or we like the rim light effect that it's casting on our sofa here. All right. So what do we want to do now here is, well, maybe we want to fine tune the lighting a little bit. So let's just make this overhead sofa light a bit less intense. So maybe if we give it a value of 0.6, I think that looks rather cool. And let's toggle it off. This is how it looked like before. Not exactly bad, but not exactly good either. This way, it just looks a lot more interesting. Maybe we could just make it just a little less stronger. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, so I think we're going to go with a value of 0.4 here. We might tweak this light later on as well. Okay, now before we conclude this tutorial, let's just make a couple of minor adjustments to our scene here. I'm noticing that the curtains here are kind of intersecting with the floor. That kind of looks awkward, so let's fix that up. We're going to go and select our curtains here. Okay, let's maybe go into the side view, and then let's just push them up a little bit higher off the floor. Okay, off the ground. So kind of like that. Maybe we can push them just a little bit higher. There we go. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, okay, that looks much better. Okay, and so that pretty much wraps up this tutorial. So as you can see, we've readjusted the lighting in our scene. That was a creative decision. I think it looks better now. And we've fine-tuned the lighting in our scene with the help of the light mix functionality. The light mix functionality is, to me, it's basically like magic. It really allows you to make creative decisions on the fly, because the adjustments that you make to your lights are basically real time. Okay, so hopefully you've learned something new here. If you like this video, please let us know in the comments. If you don't like this video, also please let us know in the comments. If you have any suggestions of what you want to see in the future tutorials, do let us know of that as well. And thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and take care, everybody.